Hello, what's up, guys? What's up? Today is Law 41. Law 41. Uh, Avoid stepping into a great man's shoes. Judgment. What happens first always appears better and more original than what comes after. If you succeed a great man or have a famous parent, you will have to accomplish double their achievements to outshine them. Do not get lost in their shadows or stuck in the past not of your own making. Establish your own name and identity by changing course. Slay the overbearing father, disparage his legacy, and gain power by signing in your own way. Transgression of the law. When Louis died in 1715 after a glorious 55-year reign, all eyes focused on his great-grandson and chosen successor, the future Louis. Would the boy only 5 at the time prove as great a leader as the Sun King? Louis had transformed a country on the verge of civil war into the preeminent power in Europe. The last years of his reign had been difficult. He had been old and tired, but it was hoped that the child would develop into the kind of strong ruler who would reinvigorate the land and to the firm foundation that Louis had laid. To this end, the child was given the best minds of France as his tutors, men who would instruct him in the arts of statecraft, in the methods that the Sun King had perfected. Nothing was neglected in his education, but when Louis came to the throne in 1726, a sudden change came over him. He no longer had to study or please others to prove himself. He stood alone at the top of a great country with wealth and power at his command. He could do as he wishes. In the first years of his reign, Louis gave himself over to pleasure, leaving the government in the hands of trusted ministers. Andre Hercules de Fleury. This caused little concern, for he was a young man who needed to sow his wild oats, and de Fleury was a good minister. But it slowly became clear that this was more than a passing phase. Louis had no interest in governing. His main worry was not France's finance or a possible war with Spain, but boredom. He could not stand being bored, and when he was not hunting deer or chasing young girls, he whiled away his time at the gambling tables, losing huge sums in a single night. The court, as usual, reflected the taste of the ruler. Gambling and lavish parties became the obsession. The courtiers had no concern with the future of France. They poured their energies into charming the king, angling for titles that would bring them life pensions, and for cabinet positions demanding little work but paying huge salaries. Parasites flocked to the court, and the state's debt swelled. In 1745, Louis fell in love with Madame de Pompadour, a woman of middle-class origin who had managed to rise through her charms, her intelligence, and a good marriage. Madame de Pompadour became the official royal mistress. She also became France's arbiter of taste and fashion, but the madame had political ambitions as well, and she eventually emerged as the country's unofficial prime minister. It was she, not Louis, who wielded hiring and firing power over France's most important ministers. As he grew older, Louis only needed more diversion. On the ground of Versailles, he built a brothel, Parc aux Cerfs, which housed some of the prettiest young girls of France. Underground passages and hidden staircases gave Louis access at all hours. After Madame de Pompadour died in 1764, she was succeeded as royal mistress by Madame du Barry, who soon came to dominate the court and who, like de Pompadour before her, began to meddle in affairs of state. If a minister did not please her, he would find himself fired. All of Europe was aghast when Du Barry, the daughter of a baker, managed to arrange the firing of Etienne de Choiseul, the foreign minister and France's most able diplomat. He had shown her too little respect. As time went by, swindlers and charlatans made their nest in Versailles and enticed Louis's interest in astrology, the occult, and fraudulent business deals. The young and pampered teenager who had taken over France year before had only grown worse with age. The motto that became attached to Louis's reign was "Après moi, la déluge," after me the flood, or "Let France rot after I am gone." And indeed, when Louis did go in 1774, worn out by debauchery, his country, and his own finances were in horrible disarray. His grandson Louis inherited a realm in desperate need of reform and a strong leader, but Louis was even weaker than his grandfather and could only watched as the country descended into revolution. In 1792, the republic introduced by the French Revolution declared the end of monarchy and gave the king a new name, Louis the Last. A few months later, he kneeled on the guillotine. His about to be severed head stripped of all the radiance and power that the Sun King had invested in the crown. Interpretation: from a country that had descended into civil war in the late 1640s, Louis forged the mightiest realm in Europe. The great generals would tremble in his presence. A cook once made a mistake in preparing a dish and committed suicide rather than face the king's wrath. Louis had many mistresses, but their power ended in the boredom. He filled his court with the most brilliant minds of the age. The symbol of his power was Versailles. Refusing to accept the palace of his forefathers, the Louvre, he built his own palace in what was then the middle of nowhere, symbolizing that this was a new order he had founded, one without precedent. He made Versailles the counterpiece of his reign, a place that all the powerful of Europe envied and visited with a sense of awe. In essence, Louis took a great with the decaying monarchy of France and filled it with his own symbols and radiant power. Louis, on the other hand, symbolizes the fate of all those who inherit something large or who follows in a great man's footsteps. It would seem easy for a son or successor to build on the grand foundation left for them, but in the realm of power, the opposite is true. The opposite is true. The pampered, indulged son almost always squanders the inheritance, for he does not start with the father's need to fill a void. As Machiavelli states, necessity is what impels man to take action, and once the necessity is gone, only rot and decay are left. Having no need to increase his store of power, Louis inevitably succumbed to inertia. Under him, Versailles, the symbol of the Sun King's authority, became a pleasure palace of incomparable banality, a kind of Las Vegas of the Bourbon monarchy. It came to represent all that the oppressed peasantry of France hated about their king, and during the revolution they looted it with glee. Louis had only one way out of 12 awaiting the son or successor of a man like the Sun King: to psychologically begin from nothing, to denigrate the past and its inheritance, and to move in a totally new direction, creating his own world. Assuming you have the choice, it would be better to avoid the situation altogether, to place yourself where there is a vacuum of power, where you can be the one to bring order out of chaos without having to compete with another star in the sky. Power depends on appearing larger than the other people, and when you are lost in the shadows of the father, the king, the great predecessor, you cannot possibly project such a presence. But when they began to make sovereignty hereditary, the children quickly degenerated from their fathers, and so far from trying to equal their father's virtues, they considered that the prince had nothing else to do than to excel all the rest in idleness, indulgence, and every other variety of pleasure. Niccolo Machiavelli, 1469, February 27. Okay, that's it, guys. Bye.